Today is November the 8th, 2019. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm of Oklahoma State University. And along with me today is Ben Pollard, retired from the Natural Resources Conservation Service. No, I get that wrong every time.
Oklahoma Conservation Commission.
Yes, retired from the Oklahoma Conservation Commission. Yes. I'll get that right when we finish eventually. And we are in Poteau, Oklahoma to interview Ed Abernathy, who was with the Soil Conservation Service from 1955 to 1986. And we're going to learn a little bit more about that in just a minute, but I need to say that this is a collaboration between the Oklahoma State University Library and the Oklahoma Conservation Historical Society, and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And the name of our project is Oklahoma's Conservation Heritage. So thank you for letting us come today. Let's begin with learning when and where you were born.
Well, let me back up a little before that.
Okay.
My mother moved here in the late 1800s. She was just a child, but they moved here from Mountain Home, Arkansas. And it was Indian Territory at the time. And her brothers came first and located them a place to live. Went back and they came in 2 covered wagons. One of them was pulled by a team of oxen. And one of my cousins told me her mother and my mother's sister said that at night my grandmother would take a safety pin and pin some of the garments of those 2 little girls to her apron, afraid that Indians might steal them during the night.
Wow.
But I was born, and my dad came from down outside of Russellville, Arkansas.
Okay.
And I don't know the exact dates that he came. But my grandpa on my mother's side was dead before they moved out here. Anyway, I was born in 1934. Back up on that. I was born in 1930 on a farm in western Leflore County. I was the youngest of 5 children. And that was the beginning of the Depression, or close to the beginning of it.
Yeah.
And of course, people on the farm grew what they ate mostly, so that didn't affect that side of it too much. But we didn't have an automobile. Didn't get electricity until 1950, and a phone about that time. If we need to make a phone call, we went to Poteau, which is about 5 or 6 miles away. Used the telephone. It was a good life, though. I had good parents. And I don't know how detailed you want me to get into.
As far as you want to go.
Okay, I went to a 1-room school a 1/4 of a mile north of where I lived. And I went to see my school teacher a couple years ago. She was 100 years old. She passed away since then. She had taught at a 1-room school 3 miles east of us the year before she moved up when I started school. The first school, she was making $60 a month, and she had to prepare lunch for the kids and do the janitorial work. So she came up to her. Finchum was the name of the school. The land was donated by a guy named Finchum. 1-room school. She moved up there and got $65 a month and didn't have to do the janitorial work. That schoolhouse was also kind of used as a community center. They had pie suppers and cakewalks there to raise money for a community Christmas tree. And the farmers went out and cut a tree and brought it in and stuck it through a little hole up in the ceiling. Had a stage up in the front. And they also had revivals there, so it was kind of a community center. And I remember as a kid the county health department would come up and give vaccines, you know. So I always dreaded those days. But I made 3 grades in 2 years. So I got into high school a little bit earlier and rode the school bus to Poteau to high school. I graduated in 1947. I was 16 years old. And one thing I thought about through the years, one day we had a teacher missing and the superintendent came in, so he didn't have much to talk about, so he was just kind of giving us some philosophy. And he said, well, as you go through life, there are people going to talk about you. Said, if you can play the fiddle, so they're going to call you a fiddling fool. And if you can't play the fool, they'll say, well, that fool can't fiddle. So I thought about that down through the years. I don't, they didn't have a football, I didn't play sports. I had a basketball team and baseball team, but no football. Wasn't enough people around for football team. But,
Did you learn to play the fiddle?
no. So that's where I stand. And I've had worse things said about me than that.
So graduating at 16, that's pretty young.
Yeah.
And 47, you would have been too young for World War II. You're
Yes.
too young for that.
Yes, I remember hearing that on the radio. I was 11 years old, I believe, when that started, in 41. And we had a battery operated radio before we got electricity out there. And I can remember before we got the battery radio, our neighbors had one a mile away. We didn't have a car, and my dad hooked up the wagon, team to the wagon, and we rode that mile down to their house. They wanted to hear the Grand Ole Opry. You know, so it was a different world back in those days.
Well, how would you get to the one-room schoolhouse? Would you
Walk.
walk?
I was janitor up there for a couple of years, made $5 a month. And I don't know that it happened all the time, but part of the time I'd go in there and I'd hear strange noises and that. As a kid, I was scared, but I didn't say anything about it to anybody. Later on, they realized that there was birds roosting up in the ceiling there, and it was about time for them to start their day, so they'd make noise getting around and getting out of the building. But I never told that to anyone.
So what did your dad farm?
Cotton and corn. Corn for livestock feed and cotton for cash crop until the boll weevil came in. And I can't tell you exactly what that was, but they finally switched over to raising peanuts. And that became the main cash crop out in that area. And he was never a big time farmer, never owned a tractor. I was told that he was considered the best farmer in that community, but the guy told me that later on. But
Well, what would be some of your chores?
bringing in coal or wood, whichever one we were burning. Wood for the cook stove and coal maybe for the heating stove. Draw a bucket of water and bring it in. Feed the chickens, shell corn for the chickens, feed the hogs, pour coal oil in the coal oil lamp. You had jobs as soon as you got big enough to do anything.
Well, how big was the house if you had 4 or 5 siblings?
We had 2 large, it was in a kind of an L shape. 2 large rooms in the front and in the back. There was a living room and then the kitchen behind, not living room, dining area, and then the kitchen behind that. And eventually they built on to one corner of that T and put another bedroom out there.
So you shared one for a while.
Yeah. And there's one of those houses that was pretty well ventilated in wintertime. Had these wide boards on the outside and then a one before to cover that, and then you put wallpaper inside to kind of keep the wind from coming in. And it was cold in the morning to get up and build a fire because it would go out during the night. And they talk about the good old times, and they were good because you were with your family. But a lot of the other things weren't that good. But we didn't know any better, so it was all right.
Well, how would you do bath time?
How we do what?
Bath time.
Had a wash tub, heat water on the stove and put in that.
In the kitchen or?
Close to a stove. No, close to in that one room where the stove was.
Okay.
Of course, in summertime you didn't need that. But
Well, how often would you get a new pair of shoes?
I guess in the fall, 'cause we usually went barefooted in summertime. And there was a little hill up above our house, and I had relatives up there that I visited. And I don't know whether you ever seen a prickly pear or not, but they got a lot of little stickers on them. And this hill up there had rock on it, so I've lost a lot of toenails and picked up a lot of prickly pear up in that area. We had a swimming hole about a mile from where I lived on a creek. Go down and go swimming, and in the summertime you were barefooted. And the ground was so hot you'd run from one shade tree to the next to let your feet cool off. I may be telling you more than you want to know.
It's great. You're great. Yeah.
Those schoolhouses were located about 2 to 3 miles apart, so the kids could walk one way or the other. And most of them were one teacher, except there was a community 3 miles north of where I lived that was farming and mining, had coal mines. And they had enough kids that they had 2 teachers. And, but mostly they were just one room teachers. And some of them just went by the district number, and some of them had names. Of course, ours was named after the guy that donated the land.
And what would you take for lunch in that one room?
You know, I don't remember. Whatever, probably sausage and biscuit or bacon and biscuit. And she usually had desserts, you know. She was a good cook. And somebody come in not unexpected, and she could go fix a good meal, you know. Things that she had a lot of, she thought every year that she had to can 100 quarts of blackberries.
Oh.
And make, she made pies and jelly and jam and so we were well fed, but we worked. And I told my son one time, because I used to take him to the farm with me on Saturday to do something, and I apologized to him a year or two ago about working so much. He said, "No, don't do it." I said, "I'm glad you did," said it learned me work ethics. And I never did break my back at it, but there wasn't much entertainment out in that. In the summertime, sometime there'd be a camp, a tent thing come around with a moving picture in it. There was some of these old B-westerns, and they come around. They cost you a dime to get in. And the young guys around there, the only way we had to go anywhere was ride horse. So we rode horses to that and tie our horses up and go in and see that. And that was great, boy. Of course, all the wheels turned backwards in those old movies. But that was our way of getting around as young people, young boys anyway. And there wasn't a church in my community, but there was an Assembly of God church 3 miles east of us, and they had church on Thursday night and then on Sunday. But and I'm not putting them down, but they're kind of a noisy bunch in church. And in the summertime, the girls they'd have all the windows open, no air conditioning. The girls would sit on the back rows, and the boys would stand outside and talk to them, because there's so much noise going on up front they couldn't hear us. And I remember one night, there was no boy said, this poor church over, said, "I got to go back inside." And I said, "Why?" And his dad was an Assembly of God preacher on up the country ways. And he said, "Well, my dad told me," said, "you be in that church house when church starts, and you be in there when it's over." So, but another thing we did was had some of the people would have parties at their house and had different games to play with for the boys and girls, you know, as we were growing up. And I can remember, we didn't have saddles. Some of us didn't have saddles. We'd ride bareback. I remember my dad giving me a little field of cotton down there and said, "You can take whatever that makes and buy you a saddle with it." And I ordered me a saddle out of Sears Roebuck catalog for $55, and I still have it.
What was your horse's name?
Buck. He was buckskin, I raised him, and he threw me a few times.
Mm-hmm.
Threw a shoulder out of place one time. I had to go get it put back in.
And where would you go to do that? What was the closest?
There was in Bacosha, there was a doctor there, Dr. Burns, and he slipped my shoulder back in place. And I did that after I rode the school bus down there. I went down to see him. And the roads were bad and still are out there. And sometimes the creeks get up over the road and the buses couldn't run, you know. My sister taught school down there, my oldest sister. And I remember one day the bus couldn't run. We walked down there 5 miles.
That would have taken you.
Pardon?
That would have taken you about 2 hours? Or 5 miles?
Probably an hour and a half. Yeah. The first school that she taught was 3 miles or so, or maybe 3.5 from my house that summer before she started because she walked that every day and had to walk a foot log on that road.
And what was her name?
Audrey, Aedry.
And what were your parents' names?
Mary Elizabeth and Doler Edward.
Okay. So when you graduated from high school at age 16, what were your plans?
I didn't have any plans. I'll tell you what I did that fall.
Okay.
I went to California and picked cotton.
Wow.
You went from Oklahoma picking cotton down there?
Yeah, I had relatives out there, and I went and stayed with them and picked cotton out there. That I think I came home with $300 and bought some cattle with it.
Huh.
And I didn't really have any plans until my mother was strong on us, on the kids going to college. My 2 older brothers didn't, but she insisted I go to college, and I came to Poteau. Poteau had a junior college, and I came down here and had a cousin here, and I stayed with them, but I couldn't find a place to live. I couldn't find a boarding house, so I went back home, and my mother really got after me to go to school. So I had a sister in school at Durant, so I went down there in January of '48. And, you know, back then they didn't have any advisors to instruct you on what to major in or anything. So being a farm boy, I majored in general agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's no teaching job in agriculture, job of teaching, and you can't teach with a degree in general agriculture. I'll tell you a little side story on that. One day, we had 2 ag teachers. One of them taught geology inside it, but one of the guys was named Roy Weisinger. He had a master's degree and he came up from Mississippi. And he asked the class, what makes a pepper hot? Well, we couldn't find the answer anywhere, so we went to this other ag teacher. He said, I guess the same thing makes a wildcat wild. So I graduated from down there in '51. By the way, tuition was $16 a semester, and you could take as many hours as you could carry, I guess. And I graduated from down there in '51, but I worked for the college some while I was down there, and it was made up job, 50 cents an hour, and they had us sweeping the streets around the college. And they had acreage out there with a peach orchard on it. And one time they had us pruning those peach trees. And I was up in one of them and had one of the saw cut it and it slipped out and cut my hand right across there. And that acts up every year. It's been so many years ago. But I still didn't have a car. I hitchhiked home on weekend. Or sometimes there was somebody down there that I knew. And I'll tell you this little story to relate to something maybe I'll say later, but there's one guy I got acquainted with by the name of Phil Harris, and he was he was a student at Southeast. He's out of the military. And he had walked and carried the mail in McAllister. And he said there was never but one day that the weather was just right. And said a dog bit him that day. So that was a lot of soil work. There was a lot of bad days.
Mm-hmm.
And since I couldn't get a job, I went to Oklahoma A&M. and tuition was $48 as a master up there in fall of 51. And still you could take all the hours you wanted to, but I did have an advisor up there. And so, SAWS seemed to me like something you could look at and study rather than some of these other classes, just memorization. And so I decided to major in SAWS with a minor in field crops. And
For another bachelor's?
yeah,
second
2
one.
years. Went 2 years up there and graduated in 53.
So with a master's or with a
Bachelor, with a bachelor's.
With a bachelor's, okay.
So,
Where did you live?
boarding house. And I roomed one time with this Roy Weisinger that was my teacher at Southeastern. He was up there working on a PhD. And I remember one morning he got up and was trying to not wake me up and he going on a field trip. When daylight came, he out on a black shoe and a brown shoe.
So what were your plans at that point when you graduated in 53, what?
To try to find a job.
Period, yeah.
Yeah. And I did some different things. I was working in a Apex machine shop. Well, let me back up just a little bit.
Okay.
After I graduated from college in 53, I had a brother that worked at Douglas Aircraft, and they were home on weekends. So I had another brother up there. And I went up to this other brother's house, and his wife was from Arkansas, had a sister, and her and a friend of hers came up to find work for the summer. Well, I was going somewhere else to have a job. My brother said, "You need to stay here where these two pretty girls are." So I wound up marrying one of them.
Oh.
And that was in May of 53, and we married in September 54.
Okay.
And I worked in this machine shop, but I ran a saw some and spot welder and swept floors and whatever flunky, 95 cents an hour, worked 10 hours a day. And my wife-to-be worked for Oklahoma Inspection Bureau. And I don't know exactly what they did except the insurance field some way. And they did inspections all in the office. I guess paperwork inspections. But I got a letter in the fall of 53 to 55 to report to Boise City to go to work as a soil scientist. Well, I hadn't applied for the job. And I had offered a job as a sanitarian with the health department there in Tulsa. And somebody told me it's going around the cafes and see if they've got cockroaches or not. But my wife said, "You need to take that job, Boise City, because that's what your field is." And so we loaded up everything we had in the 54 Ford and took off for Boise City about 8 o'clock one night. Got out there the next morning just before daylight. And so we just pulled out the edge of town, and I may run out of anything to talk about. Ran out the edge of town, just slept in the car till daylight. Well, Archie Welch did you ever know Archie Welch?
I remember the name, but
He was the DC out there. So when we went into work Monday morning, there was four in the party and then a party chief. Ralph Murphy was the party chief. He had a brother that taught at Oklahoma A&M, and I can't remember what his first name was. But anyhow, there was 4 of us showed up there besides Ralph.
So you went out there to be on a soil survey party for Cimarron County?
Yes.
That was, okay, got it.
Yes. In the fall of 55.
Mm-hmm.
And Archie said, "Well, said there's a guy that's teaching school at a little town." Well, it had 1 or 2 stores out in Kenton, in the west end of the Panhandle. And said, "I'll take you out there to see him and see if you can rent his house here in town." So we went out there, and Archie was waving to everybody we met, which wasn't very often. He said, "They may have not seen anybody in a month." And out in that area is where they dug up a dinosaur skeleton. Yeah, and that close to the Black Mesa. And another thing about out there, you couldn't get radio from downstate. You get it from Clayton, New Mexico, or up in
Mhm.
Colorado, but you
Mhm.
couldn't get that. But anyway, we wound up renting that guy's house. Don't remember what his name was, but I think his rent was $40 a month. And my base pay was $3,605 a year. And my bring home pay every 2 weeks was $112.98. Paid that rent and made a car payment and lived.
Mhm.
And, you know, wasn't any jobs there for my wife. And she finally went to work for a doctor as a receptionist. And he taught her how to give shots. She used his arms to practice on. He hadn't done that. But the story about him, he had 2 kids, and his lady out the edge of town kept those kids for him. But they wouldn't drink milk because it wasn't pasteurized. And she said, it's pasteurized. Says, the old cow's been out in the pasture all day. Well, they believed it, and they drank the milk. But Boy City was an experience for me. I saw things that I hadn't seen before. A pheasant, prairie dog town, prairie chicken, antelope, just dust storms. You know, this was only about 20 years after the big dust storms out there. And y'all have probably heard this story about J. Hammond Bennett, how he got Soil Conservation Service established. Have you heard it? Okay, well, I'll not go into that then. But they were working on this, when we were in Boy City, the upper crust were working on the 7th approximation of soil classification. And it was a worldwide classification system, but it didn't go into effect for a few years. They're still working on it. And what we were doing, they called it Standard Soil Survey. And I don't remember whether this was just Oklahoma or the United States, but we were going to have it all done in 15 years.
Yeah.
Well, that didn't happen.
Yeah. So Ed, was this the first soil survey that was done in Cimarron County?
I assume it was, yeah.
Okay.
Now, there had been some mapping done before that. If you're in Stillwater and you're collecting stuff for this museum, I sent them a red book about so thick of an old soil survey, part of LaFleur County and another county up here, I believe. And it had some, not aerial photographs, but it had some maps in it. So I thought it should be preserved, so I sent it up to the state office. You might check with them. That would be something good to put in that museum.
I'll do that,
Okay. The party up there was myself, Paris Allgood, Peter Worth, and Luther Womack.
Okay.
Luther didn't stay but a couple of months because his wife was from Louisiana. And that didn't work out too well. So he was part Indian, so he went back down and went to work at Anadarko for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And
what would have been some of the tools that you used in that time period to do your job?
The first day we went out for the party chief to show us how to map soils, we walked over a flat section of land was all the same soil, and he just used a sharpshooter. And I can't tell you when we got to use augers, but you know, you can't go deep enough to describe a soil with just a sharpshooter. You need an auger, and I guess they eventually got them to us out there. I really don't remember, but and after Luther Womack left, we had a fellow by the name of Joe Eisenhower moved out there. And we started that work in 1955. By the way, part of the western end of the county, Black Mesa and some hills out there, there'd been a survey done out there, soil survey, and they did what they call red line. They sent the maps to Fort Worth and they redlined it. They joined some units together and everything, so we didn't have to map that. Now, they had to probably rename the soils, I don't know. But we didn't have to map that area.
So what was a typical day like with your team? What did you Did you all stay together as a team, or you worked
No, we worked individually.
individually?
Yeah, and they got us some old standard drive Ford pickups out there that, get stuck at the drop of a hat. And you may start down the road, there'll be a pile of sand in it,
Yeah.
and you couldn't get through. I remember Joe Eisenhower and I pulled off in a dry creek one day in the morning and got stuck, and we worked at it all day. And finally walked out and called someone when we decided we couldn't get it out. Typical day was get up and get your map that you were working on and go to the field and start doing soil survey. I remember one day we thought it was too cold to go to work. Ralph Murphy got up and went outside, and he came back in. He said, "Boys, it's hot outside." So we got the message. And we did have dust storms. I remember one day there came a dust storm, and 3 of us came in. Well, Peter Worth, he didn't come in just before quitting time. He couldn't find his way out of the pasture.
Wow. And this was the early 50s when those storms were hitting.
Mid-50s,
yeah.
Mid-50s.
Would you have to cover your face somehow?
At night we did. We put a wet bathroom. Even though it was a brick house and everything, it'd filter in around the windows and around the door. And I remember a night or two we put a wet bath rag over our face to be able to sleep. And my wife would get discouraged because she'd get everything cleaned up, and then here would come another dust storm and there'd dust all over everything in the house.
Wow.
But it was an experience that I wouldn't take anything for, You could leave Boise City and get to Clayton, New Mexico before you left Boise City. Time change.
Mm-hmm. Mountain time.
Yeah.
So how many years were you out working on the survey in Cimarron County?
I moved to Beaver in September of 56.
Okay.
It was supposed to have been done in a year.
Mm-hmm.
So I moved over there in 56. First Allgood and I moved over there as co-party chiefs.
Mm-hmm.
And our son was born in Beaver. And Ted Lehman was the DC there. And I don't remember much about technicians, but I remember that one technician there, his name was Al Bird. Al Bird. And they got an award for building so many miles of terraces. I don't remember how many, but Ted was transferred to Chickasha, and they were having a problem down there between Soil Conservation Service and the district, I think, some kind of a seed operation. So that kind of sent Ted down there to get things straightened out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this was in 56. Well, in March of 55, they needed someone at Duncan. So Ted floated my name around, and I got transferred to Duncan in March of 57. And there was a party chief there, one guy. Last name was Miller, and the first name was either Mac or Max. Well, I hadn't been there 2 months maybe until he took a job out west somewhere. So I was there by myself, and I became the party chief, and they sent a trainee down there, Robert Reasoner, and we worked that county together. And
that would be Stevens County. And Duncan, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And by work in that county, you mean doing soil surveys still?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, still soil survey.
Okay.
Yeah. Lewis Durr was the state soil scientist, and I want to back up and tell you a little story about Cimarron. He came out to do a field review, and of course everyone took their lunch, and I did as long as I worked. I took lunch with me. We took our lunch and we drove 3 miles to get in the shade of a silo to eat lunch.
Wow.
And I learned after a while that the wind was going to blow every day. Some days I think, well, it's going to be calm today. Well, about 9 o'clock, it was going to come from one direction or another. And the prevailing wind was out of the southwest, and the trees leaned to the northeast.
Mm-hmm.
And That was, that was the unpleasant part of the job, was getting out in the bad weather. Cause it had to go on. And, so yeah, I did soil survey down there and finished it up at the end of 57. No, not 57, 59. The end of 59.
Were there much difference in those counties?
Oh yes.
Was there?
Yeah. And if you found a soil that hadn't been named or classified anything, you had to set up a new soil series. And it took 10 profile descriptions scattered around to write a series description, because you had to have a range of characteristics. It might be this deep or it might be that. Of course, it couldn't be, as you go over into another area of soils. But that was time consuming, but they didn't have to write a lot of new ones out there.
Mm-hmm.
And, but Bob Reeder was help to me. I remember I had going on vacation one time and we had a job going and he finished it up. And, I was going to tell you that from Cimarron County, Joe Eisenhower went to Missouri, I think. Peter Worth went to Adair County at Stillwell to do a soil survey up there. Ferris Allgood stayed there at Beaver County, I guess, and finished that up. And then he went on and got a doctor's degree and wound up as the state soil scientist in Utah. I still in contact with him occasionally. He lives in Sandy, Utah, just south of, he married a girl from Boise City, but he just south of.
So when you started with the agency in the 50s, how many folks were employed as soil scientists on these soil surveys, would you say? How many were going on at any one time? Because this was a big deal in the 50s, right?
Well, I think we were the only one going out there at the time, but when we scattered out, then Adair County and Sequoia County, Beaver County.
So there were just a couple of parties at any one time in the county, or around the state. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes it's just one person.
Mm-hmm.
Pete Worth moved to Adair County and died up there during getting finished survey. But if you go through Stillwell on Highway 59, there's a Marietta Schools. Well, when Pete and Mary Lee were up there, they bought a house that had some land with it. Well, they donated the land to that school, and she had connections to Marietta. So I guess she stipulated maybe, or maybe they did it on their own. I don't know.
To name it that.
Yeah. So at Marietta Schools. But we all went our separate ways, and I came to Sequoia County, and they were trying. My wife had 2 years college when we moved to Salisaw, and so she decided we had our daughter was born in Duncan, and they're 2 years, 2 weeks apart in their age, and so she went back to school at Tahlequah, commuted every day, and I'd take the kids to daycare before I went to work. And so she got a degree, and she taught vocal music here 1 year. But what I'm getting around telling, when I was at Salisaw, I wasn't going to get through in time to move in that summer where she could get over here and get a job. And I don't know who was behind this, but I appreciate it. They sent Gordon Movis, soil science from Mountain Center Park State, over there and worked about 3 months. And go home on weekends and come back so I could get through in time to move. Moved in the summer of '64. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know who did that, but I appreciate it.
So you went from Duncan to Sequoia County.
Yeah.
And then
to LaFleur County.
To LaFleur County at that point, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you got back home to your home county.
Yeah. They say they don't do that, but they did.
In roughly 10 years' time, if I'm
About 3 years in Sequoia County.
Yeah, so from the time from Boise City to
Yeah.
about
To here?
Oh, yeah,
roughly
64. Yeah. Covered a lot of ground in that.
So about how many soil surveys have you done?
Cimarron, Stevens, Sequoia, and LaFleur.
Counties, okay.
Yeah, and worked in Beaver a little while. But,
you don't claim that one as one that?
No.
Yeah.
No.
About acres.
I don't know. There's over 1 million acres in LaFleur County and also in Cimarron County. And of course, I didn't map all of either one of them, but I got a pen a year or two ago for a person that had mapped over 1 million acres.
Okay.
We had, there's a lot of this county, not a lot, but 200,000 acres in the National Forest. So they furnished a guy to map the National Forest, but I was responsible for the legend, for the mapping units and the soils and all that. And he was from Hot Springs, Rodney Peters. And
so you were the survey team leader to do LaFleur County, which is, as you pointed out, over 1 million acre county. So you worked the rest of your career as a soil scientist.
I went to Hugo in '81 as area soil scientist.
Okay.
There's a lot of variety of soils in LaFleur County. You start with the Arkansas River bottom, and then you got these uplands with a small hill in between, and then you got the Ouachita Mountains down here. And I was talking to my AC one time about walking back in the mountains. He said, well, you can just rub back and smile and think what good shape you're in. That didn't console me too much.
So did you have assistants under you for a county this big to do the soil survey? Or was it mostly just...
I had trainees. And then Rodney Peters did the forest. Yeah. I had one trainee that was here the longest. The other two were just summertime. But Kim Olszewski. And that last name is spelled Olszewski.
Whoa.
Olszewski. And she went to school at Texas A&M. And she was up further in the state working with, and I don't want to say anything bad about anybody, but this guy she was working with, his wife wasn't too happy about it. So they called me and asked me if they'd be all right, and I said sure. And my wife said sure. So Kim came down here and I trained her and I broke the rules, I can tell them now. But after she trained a while, she was walking down on those mountain logging roads, and she met a drunk Indian. Well, anyway, nothing happened anyway. But I said, Kim, you need to carry a pistol in your backpack. And that would have been a no-no for her. And so she did. But I'd rather take a reprimand than her be safe. But she stayed here, I don't know how long she worked with me, a couple of years maybe. And then she took assignment in Alaska, just a period of time. And they flew them in by plane and landed on a lake. And she did a survey as party of two. They sent a person out with her with a shotgun because of the bear. And then she came back and worked a while. And then she took a permanent assignment up there for a few years.
So would that have been the first woman that you'd ever worked with in a soil survey team?
Yes.
And that would have been what year about?
66 probably.
Right in there? Wow, that's interesting.
We got along well. We were out training one time down here in Behavior, walking through this pasture, looked over there and there's a bunch of Brahma cattle. Those Brahmas pretty bad about that. Well, after we got past him, I took off running, and here she came. Or the cattle weren't after us. But she said, I'll get even with you one day. So one day we had to dig a pit to ride the profile down the mountains, and she scared me about a snake some way. I don't remember exactly how. But I tried to do my work in the mountains in the wintertime when the rattlesnakes weren't out roaming around.
Mm-hmm.
And the same way up in Arkansas River bottom when the crops weren't on there. And I have been run off a few times.
Yeah, why don't you tell us how the soil survey teams worked with landowners and what those challenges were?
Well, you were supposed to go to that landowner to get permission to get on his property.
Mm-hmm.
And 99.9% of them said it's okay. They didn't understand what it was all about. But they had said it was okay. Well, over in Sequoia County, late in the afternoon, I went by this farmer's house, and this farmland had been plowed up. Nobody around anywhere. Went to this farmhouse down there a quarter of a mile or so and stopped. Just walked out a few feet and dug over here. The farmer came. Well, he was all hot on the collar. And I just listened to him, and he finally got around to cussing welfare. And how these people just, and I kind of agreed with him, and he got all right then. Just go ahead. So I have discovered if there's something you can talk to the person about, say that sure is a good looking hound dog you got there, something, everything's gonna work out pretty good. I did have one guy up here just tell me don't get on my property. Mm-hmm. And I had another guy out here, they were building these watershed dams out here, and they having to take control of some land. And I was parked on the side of the road eating lunch, and this old boy walked just across the fence, walked by with a rifle over his shoulder, said, "Don't you get on my land." Mm-hmm. I said, "You betcha, I'll do that."
Yes, sir.
Would it have been a company truck?
Yes.
With
it was a government truck, yeah.
With the SCS symbol or whatever.
Yeah. So I tried to heed those warnings. But if I had one track out here, the guy told me it's not get on. What you do is you run your lines up to that property, and then you kind of guesstimate it on across. But it's challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And you go to a house and there's nobody there. Well, what do? You go on, you go back 2 or 3 times, we had one. I'd about forgotten him. Had one trainee down here by the name of Claire Gorst, and he was here a while, and then he filed a lawsuit that was discriminating against him. And because he had a club foot. Well, I didn't know he had a club foot. Nobody else did. And we went to federal court in Muskogee over that. And they dismissed it, but I don't know. And then he went to work for somebody else out, not SCS, but someone else out in the central part of the state, and he had a lawsuit with them over discrimination, I think. So I don't like being on a witness stand. I remember one of his arguments was that in my diary, we had to keep a diary every day of what we'd done, that I had, I'd used one pencil to write part of it and part of it another, and he said I'd added on to it, and maybe I had. But the lawyer said, "How do you explain that?" I said, "That's real easy." I said, "I probably got called to the telephone, came back and just picked up a different pencil. Or somebody came in and I laid my pencil down and picked up another." So they bought it. But that's not a fun time.
No.
Oh, was he fired, or did he
Yes.
believe he was fired?
Yeah. I don't know what his aim was when he came over here. He was intelligent enough, I think.
So you had to keep a daily diary?
Yes. In fact, they insisted on me when I went to the field and when my AC did this, that I write on a sheet somewhere where the area of the maps I was going to. So if I didn't come in, they'd come looking for me. I remember one night, I guess before I started doing that, it was 9 o'clock when I got home. I got up here on the county line and had a 4-wheel drive truck. And I ran over this knoll before I could see it was wet out there. I got it stopped, but I buried the front end. And I had to walk a couple of miles to get a guy with a tractor to come down there and pull me out. And then had to go back up, you know. And so it was 9 o'clock at night before cell phones, and my wife was really worried about me. You know, working in the mountains, a lot of things can happen. You come up this stream and say, well, I believe I can cross that. Well, you don't realize that clear water, it may be that deep. When I was at Duncan, there was a DC at Rush Springs. And he said he pulled up one of these streams and he never tracked going across. He said, I can make it then. But come find out it was a rubber tired wagon that he was following. And he got off in there and ground the truck out.
So much of the time here in LaFleur County working on the soil survey, you were out by yourself in these remote areas.
Yes.
And it was
and in fact, after a train, if you train a person, they go out by themselves.
By themselves. Wow.
Yeah. And you know, on this mountainous area down here, you'd park where you could, close you could, and then you'd walk. And I remember one time after I'd made one of those long trips and back, my foot got hurt, and I went to the doctor finally. And I had broken a bone in my foot just from walking. I mean, it could have happened anywhere, but I had broken a bone in my foot.
What sort of things would you be carrying to do your work?
An auger.
That's it.
And a map. We'd take a piece of cardboard and make us little borders right so we could stick the map in it and carry them in there. So we could live. And I remember one time out west of Poteau, it's like one of these days that you'd rather not be in, but the wind is in March and the wind was blowing something terrible. I had to lay that map down and put my foot on it, keep it from blowing away.
Yeah.
Well, what sort of things would you be putting on the map?
Okay, where you go from one kind of soil to another. Let's say you were at here on flat land, would be one kind of soil, and you start up a hill. Well, you know there's going to be a change in the kind of soil, so there'd have to be a line to separate that, and you would have a name of that soil on each side, and maybe more than one. But and that's what I got into in LaFleur County. There were so many soils that didn't have names down here, and I had to set up a lot of new series. And I worked some with R.C. Brindley. He was next door to me over here. Let me tell you this little story. RC and I hit RC up about 3 years ago. I said, I haven't been back to Stillwater in years. He said, I haven't either. I said, let's go back up there and look around. So he picked a weekend when the football team was out of town. And we went up in it was about noon. The first place we got to was the student union. So we went upstairs, and it was a eating area, you know, a lot of kids in there. I said, RC, you sit down and I'll go get a Coke. When I got back, he said, Ed said, we sure do stand out in here. And I said, how's that? And he said, we're the only 2 people in here that don't have a backpack. I still stay in contact with RC. He's a good friend. And back saying that I didn't apply for that job with SCS, RC said he didn't either, and he thinks Fenton Gray turned their name then. That they probably went to the soil department at A&M. And
Fenton was a professor at
soil professor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't often hear somebody gets a job.
Well, you know what my philosophy always was? If they could find somebody to go to Boise City, they'd take them.
Yeah, I believe that. Yeah.
What was one of the strangest things you've seen when you've been out in the field?
Well, one of the strangest things that almost happened to me, and did when we were out in Cimarron County. I was in this section, Ferris Good all goes over in this section. We had those old Ford pickups. He came over where I was working and said, I found an animal over there. I don't know what it is. He said, come go with me over there and look at it. So I got in his truck and went over there. We decided it was a badger. Well, he had his overcoat in there and he wanted to pull up beside that and me jump out with the overcoat. I knew better than that.
So you had a little fun while you were working.
Oh yeah.
While you were working.
We did. And I think I can tell this now without getting arrested.
Uh-oh.
But we were working up around Keys in the northeast part of the county, and Ferris spotted some birds out there with feathers off their legs. Well, it was prairie chickens, I think. So I snuck a 22 out there. The next day we were out there, and we killed one of those. And those old Chevrolet pickups had a cross brace under the hood, metal rod about that big. Put that bird in my lunch bucket, and we stuck it up under the cross piece on that. Brought it home. My wife cooked it for us. It wasn't all that good. But that's interesting country out there.
Yes.
Were you also farming while you were working?
No.
No.
Now, after I moved to LaFleur County, I mean, even Sequoia County, I had a few cows out there, but my dad was living out there then, and he took care of them for me. But I bought some land out there, and I still have some cows out there.
Well, how was Hugo different from this county?
I didn't do any soil survey down there. I was the area soil scientist. I was just troubleshooter going around helping people with problems.
Okay.
Some of them might say, well, I found this area out here in this wooded area that was mapped class 7 land, stony. And here's the area and here's not that stony. Would you go out and look at it?
Yeah.
And I did that and draw a line around it. And then we had what we call a National Resource Inventory. The computer picked 106-acre tracts over the state, and you went out and identified a lot of things about them.
Mm-hmm.
And type of vegetation, I don't know what all, soils and everything about that particular spot. Well, the worst scare I had about one of those, there was a fellow from Fort Worth that grew up down here in southern Florida County that wanted to go see one of those sites down in the mountains. And they rented a helicopter, and they picked me up in McAllister, and I was the navigator. And you talk about trying to find a track out, yeah, but I showed them one and they bought it. I think it was right. I think it happened to have a pond on it.
Yeah.
And so down south of Albion down here, back in the mountains. But that was a scary time for me trying to go in cross country. You know, you pick out a highway or a railroad track or something that you could identify. And it was, I didn't care for any more trips. We came into Poteau for lunch, and my wife met us and took us lunch. When we came in, before he landed, he was looking this way and that way to see if anything was coming. Another airplane was going to land. And then in the afternoon, he knew where he was going, I guess, or somebody. We went up in the northeast part, counties west of here. And I guess then he took me back to McAllister and I came back home. But that was a thrilling time.
You've had some exciting times.
Yes.
Was there any point when you thought, I think I'll get out before you decided to retire?
No.
You just, once you got in,
No.
you made a decision to be a career?
Yep. And I know they're high-paying jobs. I probably wasn't qualified for one, but there was pretty much job security, unless you really messed up.
So you were an AC?
No.
No.
I just saw. I started out as a GS5 and went to GS11. And
you finished as an area soil scientist rather than area conservationist.
Yeah.
Area soil scientist.
Yeah, covered this southeastern part of the state.
So would you have known Roland Willis?
Yes.
Because he was a soil. He was a soil.
He was a state
Conservation.
State con, yeah.
I mean, he had the soil background
Soil
too.
background.
Yeah. I visited with Roland when I seen him. He wasn't at this last retirees dinner I went to. I don't know how he's getting along, but.
So you moved 4 or 5 times. from Boise City to Beaver to Duncan to Salisaw and then back here.
Poteau,
And then Hugo.
6 times.
6 times.
You know, I don't know as much with soil scientists, but with the DCs and farm planter and technicians, not technicians so much, but they wanted to move them over the state to get a broad range of experience. Different vegetation and soils and different ways of writing plans. So, I think I got a broad experience.
In about 30 years worth, what were some of the changes that took place during that length of time?
Okay, we would just, in the beginning, we would just look at a soil, and if it had a clay layer down here this deep, we'd say, well, that's gotta be different than one that has got rock at that depth. So you just look at them and describe that, and that's what you did. Later in the Florida County, in Sequoia County, we had a soil classification system. And you had a big thick booklet, and you could go through that and pick out the things that you needed to separate. In fact, I set up a Salisaw series over in Sequoia County. It was a well-drained soil, about so deep and had gravel under it. Well, we ran, when Kim was here, we ran into one down in the south end of the county, down this side of Smithville. Just about the same soil, except it had gray bottles in it. Well, that's important from the standpoint of putting a septic tank in it. So you have to look at it. Starting out, you know, it's a lot of agricultural. That was the main use. But then they developed it onto housing, highways, parks, about anything that soils were used for. You need soil survey to determine whether there are problems there or not. But anyway, Kim said, it's like Salisaw except it's wet. Said, let's name it Wet Saw. So we did. But a lot of them would establish you'd maybe name it after some community close to it or something.
But you got to, in your job, got to name a lot of soils over the years. So you could make it up based on where you were or
Yes.
name it after, did you ever name one after a family member?
No, no. No, I wouldn't treat them that bad. But I'd set up a lot of them here in the Florida County. And especially, you know, mountainous area, and then, and the Arkansas River bottom was real hard to map. And it took me a little while to figure this out. But the real sandier soils are close to the river. The medium textures are kind of midway. And on the back side of the floodplain, or you get your clayey soil. Well, I finally figured out when that water comes out of the river, it slows down a little, drops the sand, it slows a little more, and drops the medium size, and then on the back side, it drops the clay particles out. You won't tell Bobby Birdwell this, but he came down here one time and going to show me how to map Arkansas River bottomland. And it's so mixed you can hardly dig 2 holes alike up there. And we stopped and dug a hole, and he said, well, it's sure not like this in Tennessee. But that was, and there's a lot of inclusions in those mapping areas up there. And some of them are small.
Tell us what an inclusion is.
That's a little area of a different soil out in this big area of one kind of soil.
Would you bring samples back with you or do it while you were there and just leave it?
Just leave it.
Leave it.
Now, at one time in Sequoia County, they had us to get samples made some little wooden trays, and they took them to Fort Worth for the final correlation on the county over there.
So you'd have symbols on your map. You'd have symbols for different.
No. Now, at one time we made some. Well, out the auger we had on the side of the truck, we'd get cores out and put them in a plastic thing with a side cut out of it. But I don't think there's any here. There may be some around in some areas, but I don't have any here.
What all would be included in a soil survey? I've seen them. Some of them are pretty thick, but I haven't looked.
Well, all the interpretations all the way from farming to grassland to woodland, and then like building sites, highways, just numerous things in there they've got interpretations for. And then they've got a write-up in there about the general area of the county, the climate, what the average temperature and average rainfall is, when the normal first frost of the year is, and have you not seen the soil survey?
I have seen them, but I have not looked through them. I've seen them on the shelf. I'll have to look.
Yeah.
So who would use those? How would they be used?
They sent the supply to the district office, Soil Conservation District office, and then anybody that came in and wanted one that had a reason for it, they'd give them a copy.
Okay.
Now I think you can put it off the internet. Yeah.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're all available digitally.
Yeah. In fact, they don't have any more here in Florida County. Now, either county still has some, I think, but they don't have any still here.
And every county in Oklahoma has been surveyed once, at
I
least.
believe so. Yes, and some of them they've gone back over some.
Mm-hmm.
You know, back, it's gotten more down to fact, I guess, but in Stevens County, Lewis Durr came out and set up some series. That was before I got there. One of them was, the name of it was Severely Eroded Deep and Shallow Loamy Prairie Soils.
I like that.
And that almost, I think that made it into the soil survey. But you don't do that anymore. You put a name on it.
Uh-huh.
And if there's, and a complex is where there's more than one soil. They couldn't be separated. They just put one area in there. And a soil association is where I had an association down south end of the county, where this stream was running like this, and then the overflow would take it like this. They had little ridges up and down. Well, they had one in the low part, one on the upper part. Well, that's a soil association.
Hmm. So, since the soil survey is used a lot by technicians and DCs, did you ever provide training to other SCSers on how to use soil surveys? How did that training go that someone new to the agency learned how to do that?
I don't know. I don't really know how they did that.
But the soil survey teams didn't provide training.
Not to my knowledge. Because most of us were gone somewhere when the soil survey came in.
Mm-hmm. And am I remembering right? You got an award or a recognition for 1 million acres of soil survey here. That was for LaFleur County.
Well, it was statewide.
Statewide,
Yeah.
okay.
I asked her if you would be interested in seeing some of the awards I've gotten down through the years.
Well, at some point we will be, sure. Yes, we can do that at some point here.
Yeah, I've got some out in the car.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to look at that, Ed.
Yeah, after we finish
Mm-hmm.
up.
Yeah.
So you put in 30 years, 30-ish, and you decided to retire, or what was your motivation at that point for making a switch?
I guess that was my plan all along, to work 30 years and retire.
Okay.
I was 55 on the 24th of September that year, and I had to wait till October the 12th before I could have retired. So I worked all over till the first of the year.
Mm-hmm.
What did you do on your last day? Do you remember?
Not much. No, I don't remember.
Did go out and dig one more hole?
No. No. But it's been an interesting career, and I look back and see where SCS was good to me.
Mm-hmm.
And you would have retired before computers became a common thing on your desktop.
Yeah. I guess the thing that I'd say that I gained most was meeting different people and making friends.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I know some people are dead, not so many of them anymore, but all over the state.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the worst week I ever had, and I I said I wasn't gonna bring people into this, but doing a final field review over there, had a correlator. Ed Templin came down from Lincoln, Nebraska, and he was in Fort Worth, and he'd come to Oklahoma once. And they said the story was that Lewis Durr took him back to state line and told him not to come back. Well, Lewis Durr didn't come down on the final field review. Henry Otsuki was there. But he's the kind of person that liked to put other people down and give you a hard time. So that was the roughest week I had. Soil Conservation Service.
Well, are there any observations you'd like to make about how Soil Conservation Service changed over the 30 years you were in, or anything else you'd like to share about highlights or?
I don't know that, in fact, we got out this technology on how to really separate soils.
Mm-hmm.
We did it on certain grounds before, but we got out, and I could take the book and say, well, it's got models down here 30 inches, I've got to separate that out from this other soil. Well, I wouldn't have known. I'd known that if it got real gray, that showed a wetness factor, and I need to show that out. But this pinpointed the things that I could do and needed to do. And I think I had to send that book in when I got through with it.
Did you keep any of your daily diaries?
No.
Didn't?
No.
No one has that. We've asked that question and no one has. We need an example for their.
Yeah, and no, I didn't keep any of it. Not even that one. I went back and wrote in. I didn't say anything that wasn't untrue.
Yeah.
But just had more detail.
So once you retired, what did you do next? Well, but before that, when did you join the conservation district here?
In '86.
So that's same.
After I
okay.
retired,
Okay,
yeah.
same time. Okay.
Yeah.
So that timeline. Go ahead then.
Yeah. Well, after I retired, I bid on sprigging a flood control dam over in Poteau County. Steep slope. Had a neighbor help me, and I bid it too cheap. The DC over there told me so. But anyway, I had a small tractor, 35 horse, and a sprigger behind it, and we had a winch fastened to a dump truck and ran a cable down to that, and I rode that tractor on that side slope sprigging that grass. Well, that was the only one I did. And then I bid on another job building some fence around the flood control dam out in the central part of the state. And then I bought a Bermuda grass digger and sold Bermuda sprigs. It had a side boom on it where you could drive a truck or anything under it. And then I worked for Farrell Cooper Mining Company on reclaimed mine land up here by Red Oak. I prepared seed bed and planted grass, planted all my roots up there. Had a neighbor help me. We worked together on that. And I had cattle at the time. And,
So you really didn't retire. You just second career here.
No, I don't want to retire. There might have been some other things I did in the meantime. I don't remember, but I stayed busy at something.
Well, could you have continued doing the soil survey? You didn't have to retire.
No,
you
I
just
didn't have
chose
to. Yeah, I could continue it on. But they've restructured soil conservation some since then. I don't think they have areas anymore.
Right.
Or these ACs.
Did you have an opinion on whether the chief should be appointed or a what's the other word? Or an
A
employee?
political appointment versus a career? Yeah.
I kind of think they should be a career. They got the background and they know what's going on.
Well, when you joined the conservation district office here, were you on the board of directors then?
Yeah, that's what it is.
It is board of directors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he became a board
Yeah,
member.
when I retired in '86, Kenneth Ferguson was the DC here, and they had someone that had gone off the board, or was fixing to, and he asked me if I'd serve on it. You can serve.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right.
No.
You can get all those jobs that you want.
Because they're volunteer, right?
Yeah. At one time, I was serving on the district board out here. I was serving on the solid waste board. I was chairman of a water resources deal we had going here in the county. I was chairman of the deacons down at the Baptist Church. And you kind of meet yourself coming back sometimes.
Wow.
Were you the chair of the board?
I was for several years, yeah. You know, and I just felt like it's time for some of these young people. In fact, I mentioned to the district director here the other day that it's about time for me to get off, you know, at my age. And he said, no, I said, you need to stay here. I said, you and one other guy are the one that goes to the area. Well, they pretty well all go to the area meetings, but not to the state meetings. And, but I don't want to outlive my usefulness. The only thing is, I'm close in here, and if you need checks signed or paper signed or something, I can come out and do that. And really, I should get off and let some younger person get on here.
Well, what are some of the issues that are unique for LaFleur County, or at least some of the things they're facing?
Well, he mentioned a while ago, we had some people from Arizona bought a flood control structure down here, and they moved a trailer house in the emergency spillway and set it up in the emergency spillway. And they even planted shrubbery and put a septic tank in and all that. And our district judge here is who we went to handle it. Our state senator wanted us to meet him down there. Of course, he was representing the people, so he didn't do anything. Well, they dismissed it with prejudice, so we couldn't file it again. But we had a woman on the board, Virginia Kidd, and she knew everybody. So she knew somebody up there in the state attorney general's office, so they got that ruling overthrown. And we had another hearing, and they had to move it. But that's the biggest controversy we've had down here, I guess.
Well, and some of the other issues, do you have to deal with feral hogs?
Yes, and I've got a lot of them. I've got a trap set out for them.
Wow.
I told someone one day, I said, I've had a lot of pulled pork the last 3 or 4 years. They get in the trap and I shoot them, then pull them out. But my trap hadn't been set until just the other day. My son down there and got him to help me move it. But I've caught a lot of hogs in it. But they root up my hay meadows. Now, there's been, I understand, $75 million appropriated to fight that hog program. And the secretary in here told me that the hogs started south and went north, and they're going to start north and go south with hopefully eradication. But I feel for those people that, well, one of the guys on the board last night asked him if he had his crops out, and he said no, he still had some soybeans in, but they gave him fits down here on the Poteau River.
So besides traps, how else do they plan to eradicate some of the other solutions?
Rifle.
Okay.
They have gone now, so I'm hearing that they'll send out a drone and it'll locate those hogs, and then they can go out and shoot them. I haven't gone that far yet.
Well, do they have any useful purpose?
No, I told someone that if you come up with the idea for this, you can make $1 million. Teach them to eat fire ants. If you could do that, we'd be in business.
There you go. Yeah.
Or cedars, I guess, in the other part of the state.
In other parts of the state, yeah, they gnaw down some cedar trees.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about water quality issues and the poultry industry and some of your involvement in that whole issue over the years, Ed.
Okay, we've had a water quality project here in LaFleur County in 319, and you know, they did what they could, get some people to put in new septic tanks or a septic tank. Maybe they just run the line out on the side of the hill. but they did some, and we did some water testing there for a while.
Right.
I don't know whatever came of that. And as far as litter management, I started work for Oklahoma Environmental Management Service. I had to stop and think to get that right. Part of the Department of Agriculture. And Dan Parrish was the head of that at one time. And him and Jim Schwartz came down here and met RC and I at Western Citizen and hired it. They wanted soil. Dan Parrish wanted soil scientists to write those. So we agreed and we started in '99. And I worked up until 18, through 18. Now, there was 1 year in there that didn't work because they couldn't get any money. But then about 3 years ago, Dan called me and they didn't have enough money but for one soil scientist, and he asked me to take it, and I said, well, I wouldn't do it until I talked to RC. And I talked to RC and he said, I'm about ready to quit anyway, so it didn't bother him. So I went ahead and worked another 3 years or so.
So you worked nearly 20 years, did I get that right?
Yes.
For the Department of Ag, and that was a part-time job? Okay.
It was a contract.
Yeah.
And I worked all the way after RC. When he was working, he worked Idabel and over like Muskogee County and over in that area. And I worked the eastern tier all the way to the Kansas line. But after he quit, well, I went all the way down to McCurtain County.
And these were animal waste plans for poultry operations, or exclusively, or did you do other?
No, just poultry.
Just poultry. Okay.
Laying hens, pullets, and turkeys. And they had to have a soil, if they were going to spread litter, they had to have soil test and litter test. And you could determine from that the maximum amount of litter they could put on. Now, and they decided, they got a new man up there now, and they decided that they're going to make the farmers pay for those plans instead of the state paying for them. And they've gone to mostly computer generated. And I don't do computers. I'm from the old school, old A&M.
So you would work directly with the poultry producer, looking at the soils and the...
No, I just went by their soil test.
You went by the soil test, and then determined the amount of poultry litter that could be applied on their land.
Yeah, the maximum amount.
Yeah.
And then I'd make a recommendation that's usually less than the maximum amount. But Jeremy Siger is the head of this now, and up there for a meeting here last year, and they'd gotten some plan in from a guy that just, I don't know. You know, we had to go to school to do that, and I think they're just anybody that wants to, because he'd gotten a plan in there recommended 13 tons of litter to the acre. And as a general rule, I usually 2 tons to the acre, about all I'd recommend. So there's going to be some headaches in it. But I didn't agree with Jeremy on some things, and I guess, you know, my age, maybe I'm old enough to retire. No, just change to do something else.
Yeah, there you go.
Would you have to go out and get the samples yourself?
No, they had to do that prior to me going to. They'd get them and send them into the lab,
and you had to trust in that they were actually getting from where they were supposed to be.
Yeah, they had a lawsuit going one time. I think the governor was suing up on the Illinois River, and they came down here and I had to testify on that thing because I'd written some plans up there. And I think the last question, well, they didn't know it, the lawyers didn't know anything about it. They got one of my plans out and it had 5 or 6 fields on it and said, now why have you got these numbered different? So I had to explain that to him. But anyway, the last question they asked was, now, if he has a soil test and a litter test, and you write the plan and he goes by it, there's no room for any question on it. I thought about it, and I said, well, the only question would be if he did his soil and litter test properly.
Mm-hmm.
I know a guy, the guy told me this story down here, but he needed this soil test, and he was in a hurry. He went and got one out of the garden, sent it in. Well, he knew that his pastures were low, so the next year he just went out and spread litter on them. Well, and sent the report in, and that garden sample was real high. I think they fined him $1,000.
Yeah. Mm.
But you meet a lot of nice people like that, and a lot of different situations.
So what has the impact been in Leflore County on poultry operations or this part of the state? What have you seen in your career and on changes in the industry and management of litter and those sorts of things?
Well, a lot of people have grown chickens. A lot of it's for the litter.
Mm-hmm.
They've got pasture land and they want to put the litter on. But OK is slowly squeezing these little growers out. They're building new big complexes, and they're slowly. Now, they have to compost the chickens and all that, and you know there's going to be some cheating along now and then. But the guy that spreads the litter, nobody out there, most of them don't have a spreader truck, so they hire somebody, and he has to get a copy of the litter test and the soil test and send them in, so they can keep a pretty close check on it. I don't know how much is it improved water quality, but probably some if they're doing it according to law.
Yeah.
The regulations, there's some regulations.
Right.
Some regulations.
Oh yeah. And they've got a field man down here that goes around and works with them. State has.
I heard you mention you had worked a little bit with Farrell Cooper Mining, and Leflore County has had a history of some coal mining over the years. Anything you've seen or worked on related to mine reclamation?
Out here, between here and Fort Smith, off Highway 12, one of our board members got land in there, and there's humps out there. Well, some agency filed a lawsuit against Farrell Cooper, and I think they ruled against Farrell Cooper. They're supposed to go back and fill that in, and they did. But now I talked to the landowner, and he said they won't ever do it. They'll buy somebody off or do something. But at one time, they hired me to go up here where they were going to strip and go around and make a survey on how thick the topsoil was.
Okay.
And but a lot of it, they've reclaimed that I tried to plant grass on, had so many rock in it that you couldn't hardly get over it and prepare a seed bed. And I don't remember where this was. I think this up in Haskell County, I was doing something. And there was a dozer up on a high wall above a strip pit pushing topsoil off of the edge of that strip pit.
Not a good thing.
No, they're supposed to stockpile that. And
spread it on the top at the end,
But I'm getting a little sentimental now, but I've had a good life. I've had a good wife, good children, and had a good job, and met a lot of nice people.
And you got to do a lot of it within a small radius from home.
Yeah, my wife's been dead 14 years. So
and what was her name?
Joanne. Yeah.
And 2 children?
Yes. They both live in Fayetteville. My son's a medical doctor up there, and my daughter's got her PhD, and she works for the Veterans Affairs, I think.
Any of them from OSU?
No.
You're trying.
No, I'm the only cull in the bunch. And actually, I'm not from OSU.
Oklahoma A&M.
Oklahoma A&M.
Yes. Good old Aggies.
Yeah.
Does your diploma says OAMC, Oklahoma
I imagine it would if I could find it. I don't even know where to start looking for it.
You have a good sense of humor, it seems. Yeah. Did you have to work with very many Native American tribes on any anything for this county?
No,
Not for you.
no, they had programs, that gave emphasis working with them, but I just, if I got on any other land, well,
What about for the highway? I was reading somewhere Highway 89 you had issues with. Is that right, or is that something else?
had issues with what?
Highway 89 when
No,
they were trying to take it through. Well, it must have been something else. Okay, scratch that.
I did go with some guys one time from the State Department of Agriculture. They were gonna make a bypass of Heavener and Poteau, and I walked along the right of way and checked the soil for them, and the city fathers got those killed.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like too you were on the road a lot.
Yeah, especially when I was working for the state and going up north, drive hundreds of miles a day.
Mm-hmm.
Ever run out of gas?
I did in my government truck one time.
Did you?
Out here in the north end of the county. I had to walk probably a quarter of a mile to fill the station.
And did you tell anyone?
Probably. Probably.
So you wouldn't change anything?
I would probably change that week I spent in Sequoia County with that guy. I decided after that, you don't have to put up with stuff like that. And I made up my mind then I wasn't going to do it anymore. But most people were very nice that I worked with.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever get acquainted with Henry Otsuki?
No, I remember him, but I wasn't acquainted with him. Yeah.
And I was thinking this all started because you listened to your wife and she said you ought to take that job.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Had she ever been to Boise City before she
No.
recommended that?
No.
I didn't think she probably had. Okay.
No, but she could fit in about it.
Yeah.
I liked if I had to go to a banquet or something and I didn't know anybody, I liked to take her with me because she could talk to anybody.
Yeah.
Find something in common to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So
But she taught school here in Poteau for years, and she taught at Hugo while we were down there. Choir, school choir, took them to contest, and it usually icy roads when they had to go. I remember one time we were talking about something happened to the bus, and the old boy said, I believe I could fix it if I had a screwdriver. And she said, wait a minute, I think I've got one in my purse.
Came prepared.
But she got a certificate where she could drive a bus and whatever she needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And she did computers. I don't. Well, I've got a computer at the house, but I don't do it.
they're good and bad for computers.
Well, I'm sure this was way out of date now. But when I was doing those plans for the state, my daughter came down in them for a while, and then I got my nephew lived up because he could do computers. He came down and did them for me. I'd get half of those ready, and he came down and do all the computer work for me.
And I was reading that you were a member of the Poteau watershed team.
Yes.
What did that entail?
Well, that was when we had this 319 project down here on Poteau River.
Which runs north, flows north, I
Yes.
read.
Yeah,
Only one in the state.
yeah.
Okay.
You got anything else? Anything else you want to say that we haven't asked? We haven't known to ask. We've covered a lot.
Well,
Timber. Robert Kerr, probably not. How southeast Oklahoma was different from the Panhandle
climate-wise, more than anything else,
more than
the
anything.
rainfall out there was about 10 or 12 inches a year, and down here it's about 45.
Mm-hmm.
So
So more trees here.
more trees here, but that doesn't suit everybody. I don't remember whether it was, I was thinking about that this morning, whether it was here or Sequoia County, but the DC position came open and that guy came and looked at it. He stayed 2 weeks and left. He said just too many trees for him.
Yep.
Yeah. But it's a business now. You go from here to Idabel and you'll see a lot of logging trucks on the road, hauling pine logs.
Well, does the Conservation District office have to deal with any issues surrounding that?
Not normally.
I don't know.
We had a forester on staff here at one time, but he left and we don't have one anymore. So, like I say, part of it is national forest, and the rest of it's privately owned. But if they come in here, you know, like to know where they could get a source of seedlings or something like that, then they'd have that information available for them. They do what they do what they call clear cutting down there now. They'll take all the trees off and go in with a ripper, rip a big hole and let it settle back in, and then go in and plant the pines in probably in January, February. And most of that is south of here. In fact, all the plantations are south of here. Warehouser owns a lot of land down in there.
So you'd have to worry about erosion if they're cutting them all off, right?
Well, they get something going back on there.
Pretty quick.
Of course, you'd be surprised how many weeds and different plants come up out there.
Yeah. And red cedar's not an issue in this part,
There's some red cedar here, but they're not really an issue.
but fire ants are.
Yes, they are. And they'll build a mound that high. And you don't want to let one of them bite you. It hurts.
Have any on your place?
Yes. I even have them in my lawn here and there.
So they're that bad. How many acres do you farm today?
I've got 600 acres. It's not all in one place. I mean, it may be a mile or two apart, but I've got most of it rented out. I just kept the home place where my mother and dad lived, enough to run the cows I want to run, and I rent it out to another guy. He takes real good care of it. In fact, he built a pond on it, and he mixes his weed control chemical with his fertilizer and puts it all out at one time. And he thinks it's doing a good job. So he's got a master's degree in agriculture from Arkansas University.
So no till?
There's no farming here except up on the river bottom.
Okay.
There's just, you don't find any, I don't know of anyone around this area.
Anyone grow peanuts still?
No, it's not economically feasible anymore.
Okay.
I'll tell you about, I told you about going to California picking cotton that year. I had a cousin that we were pretty close. We'd go see them one year and they'd come see us next. And we went out to see them one time. We were driving up to visit someone else. So a green cotton picker out there, and he said they call those green okies.
Green okies.
Yeah, okies, not a good, how did you respond to that?
Well, I pick cotton and I'm green.
And you're from Oklahoma?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Anything else? No?
We've covered the waterfront.
It's your-
Thank you, Ed. I've learned a lot from you today.
Well, I hope most of it's true.
Yeah.
Well, then my last question is, how do you want people to remember Ed Abernathy?
Fair. Honest and fair. You know, that's the things you learn from childhood. Be respectful. And probably that fool can't fiddle.
All right, then thank you very much for sharing with us today. It's been great.
Thank you, Ed.
Okay.